Before we dive in, here's another show you can enjoy in the True Story FM family of entertainment podcasts.
Ever wondered what happens when a Zoomer who grew up on the Clone Wars,
a millennial Anakin defender,
and a grumpy old Gen Xer walk into a cantina to talk Star Wars?
then we've got the podcast for you.
Star Wars Generations is a place for fans of all backgrounds to come together, talk about why we love the franchise, and what we can learn from each other.
With so much new Star Wars content coming out, we take a deep dive into all of it. We talk stories and characters, what we learn about the Force and the Empire, Republics old and new, and how each story adds to the larger picture.
Besides episode-by-episode coverage of the new shows, we've been going back to watch the movies in release order. We talk about Star Wars novels and video games, along with fan content and cosplay.
And with each episode, we're just starting the conversation, and we hope you jump in. We'll read your feedback, answer your questions. We've even had full episodes dedicated to questions raised by listeners like you.
You can find us under Star Wars Generations on your favorite podcast app or by going to theethicalpanda.com. May the Force be with you.
Now this is podcasting.
Hey there, true believers. Andy Nelson here from the Marvel Movie Minute podcast with the rest of the team.
Pete Wright, Kyle Olson,
Rob Cabasco,
and Matthew Fox.
This is the podcast where we dissect the Marvel Cinematic Universe 1 minute at a time, exploring every detail of this epic superhero franchise.
In our season looking at Iron Man 3, we're going to mix things up a bit.
That's right, Rob and I are your guides, but instead of our usual minute-by-minute format, we dive into 5 minutes of the film in each weekly episode.
It's a totally new approach, but one that still allows us to explore all the depth and detail that makes these movies so special, even if Iron Man 3 isn't all that special.
Hold on, that's where you're wrong. Extremist, Shane Black.
Yeah, would you like to look at the Mandarin and Maya Hansen? Mm-hmm.
So whether you're a die-hard Marvel fan or just love deep dives into movies, there's something for everyone on Marvel Movie Minute.
Suit up and join us on this epic audio adventure. You can find us at truestory.fm or by searching Marvel Movie Minute on your favorite podcatcher.
Because in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, every minute is packed with excitement.
Enough said.
I'm Pete Wright.
And I'm Andy Nelson.
Welcome to the next reel. When the movie ends,
our conversation begins.
The Boston Strangler is over. Everybody's banging everybody. It's a horny world.
This is the story of the self-confessed Boston Strangler, based on Gerald Frank's startling bestseller. It has been filmed where the actual happenings made shocking headlines around the world.
I want you to coordinate the investigations with the Commonwealth. Set up a Strangler Bureau.
I'm not even remotely qualified for this kind of thing.
You want the stranglings to go on?
That's not fair.
Preview audiences have acclaimed this a remarkable motion picture. Academy Award stature. For the indelible quality of this film is that the tension, the suspense, the emotion mount when the camera goes beyond the panic-stricken streets of Boston, beyond the dark corridors of the apartment houses where the Strangler silently prowled, beyond the bedrooms of lonely, fearful women, into the forbidden corners of a man's mind and soul. Why did 13 women open their doors willingly to this stranger? The Boston Strangler stars Tony Curtis in a powerful characterization unlike anything he has ever portrayed on the screen. Henry Fonda and George Kennedy.
These things you see that come into your head and you don't have anything to do about it, now is the time for you to try to make some sense out of them. Face it, what did you see?
Woman's breasts.
Whose?
I don't know. Her blouse came off in my hand.
Albert, now is the time. Go back.
I had never seen The Boston Strangler.
Yeah.
What a film.
Yeah, I know. I love it.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know why you've let me never see this film.
I was keeping it from you all this time because I knew eventually you would build this series.
Feels like it.
But before we talk about the movie, can you talk about, like, we're kicking off this series, the return to the 1968 crime film series with this film. What was it about returning to the 1968 crime films that drew you in to pick the three films we're going to be discussing?
Well, I liked the original 1968 crime films that we did. They're good movies. And I felt like this was a list of movies that I haven't seen and that I felt like we were in a good place to explore. You had seen, I think, all of them, which is...
No, I've only seen this one. I haven't seen The Split or A Dandy and Aspic.
Oh, well, that's great news. Actually, I take it back. I have seen A Dandy and Aspect. But these just looked like really interesting casts. Boston Strangler, I was checking off a movie that I knew I had to see. And so, of course, that was going to be on the list. I think you've mentioned it before in other conversations a number of times. It just felt like I got to check this one off the list. The Split looked fascinating. And so it just seemed like a nice way to jump back into an era that I'm quite fond of and a genre that is always satisfying.
When it's a movie with any of the Fondas, you're supposed to say a genre that I'm quite fond of.
That's another one. You just did another one. Members will hear the fantastic definition Andy created in our pre-show, and now we've got a
second one.
A film I'm fond of. I'm really quite fond of this film.
I'm quite fond of. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the end of our broadcast year today, and this is going to be the kind of show that we do.
It might show, yeah. Oh, my goodness. But yes, The Boston Strangler, this film is a fascinating one because based on a book written after they presumably thought they caught the guy, made in that same window of time before they really actually figured out the case. And to this day, there still is some mystery about the realities of the actual Boston Strangler. And we'll talk about that a little bit. But I mean, for starters, just talking about this as a crime film, I mean, it's something that seemed to hit you quite well. So initial thoughts from you.
The way they presented, first of all, Tony Curtis's character. Tony Curtis plays Albert DeSalvo, in the world of the film, the presumed Boston Strangler. The fact that we don't really get him until I think halfway through the film,
full hour, right?
Yeah, it's an extraordinary bit of restraint, and it builds just a lot of pressure that needs to be released in the film because we do see crimes in sort of action, and I think that just makes that sort of level of curiosity and pressure build really satisfyingly. It also allows us to meet the law enforcement that is waged against this action, this crime, this set of crimes, going through kind of the whole cycle of acceptance for people who don't believe that it's connected, that they're connected crimes, that suddenly start to become acclimated to the idea that it's connected crime. We bring in Henry Fonda, who's a law professor, and he sort of starts to help the police come to an understanding that this is more than just what it seems. And so we do get enough focus up front that I think makes the reveal of the actual criminal in the film that much more satisfying. And of course, it's going to be Murray Hamilton, who's the skeptic up front. Like, of course he is. He wanted to open the beaches. So I just found it really, really compelling.
Yeah. And I mean, I can't remember how long ago I first watched this, but it was a film that, I think that Richard Fleischer is often seen as a director who, makes, I guess I would say, fun and interesting films, but not necessarily like the big award winners, things like 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea or Violent Saturday or The Vikings.
Red Sonja.
There you go. Throw that in there. And so I think that, there's a lot of genre stuff too, like Mr. Majestic and The New Centurions and Tora Tora Tora, but also has done some interesting crime films. And I think, like, we talked about him way early in the podcast when we talked about Compulsion. which he did for the same studio. Also, this is another film with under the heading of Richard Zanuck at the studio at the time. So he was
got to put that in the tag it.
Exactly.
It to Zanuck.
So, I think that there's something about Fleischer that even though when he's making his films, you may not see them as the big award winners, but they're awful fun. And I always have fun watching his films. And I think because I enjoyed Compulsion so much, I can't remember exactly what drew me to the Boston Strangler, but when I watched this, I'm like, holy cow, like the way that he's playing with split screens throughout the film is fascinating to kind of build this story and give us so many perspectives, especially during the first part with the police investigation. And you see all the different pieces of the puzzle. Really, that's what it felt like. This was a puzzle that we're watching. But then to kind of continue the story, and you get to places where you have our man in charge, Bottomley, Henry Fonda's character, interviewing. He's sitting down and doing these interviews over a period of time with DeSalvo. And you get that type of cinematic storytelling where they're talking in the room where things are happening. And then we flash to where DeSalvo is remembering the situation. Like, for example, sitting down and watching the JFK funeral. And then he's sitting down watching the JFK funeral, but he's responding to Bottomley now sitting in the chair watching the TV. And then you cut to the other angle, and now Henry Fonda is in the room talking to him. Like, you're seeing a cinematic way of crafting this story where the actual interview goes from the room itself to the location in the memory. And so it's like he's now in the memory having that conversation. And that happens a number of times throughout this film. And I just remember when I first watched this, I was like, Fleischer really was doing such interesting things with the way that he constructed this story and crafted this story to really look at the police investigation, the psychology of what's going on with the killer, and just the process that he went through to actually kind of commit these crimes. And so you're getting so many different angles of the way that the story was told. It's a fascinating film and just one that I absolutely adore.
The other take on this is the media take. Well, I guess there are two more. The media and sort of public hysteria angle, which is like the depicting the panic in the streets kind of a thing that overtakes people, that there's this one person who is capable of creating such extraordinary fear in a community. I thought was perfect. And then, we did a whole episode on Sitting in the Dark about home invasion movies. And what you sort of discover when you watch a whole bunch of home invasion movies is that, in fact, you think you're safe in your house. You really do. You think you're safe. And getting a stranger getting into your house is vastly easier than you would ever imagine it is. And there are any number of methods to get into your home. But unless you go full purge and really lock things down, it's easy to get into your house. And this movie showcases urban vulnerability in a super practical way. Like how he's effortless in knocking on doors and getting into the houses of these victims. Effortless. And that part is terrifying. Before he lays a hand on them, it's terrifying just how easy and vulnerable these people's homes are.
Well, and that's like the way that he plays that is exactly because you keep having these detectives and Bottomley and everyone like, why are these people letting this guy into their house? Like these single women, what are they doing? But he just poses as like, like the lady, the first time we really see him successful, he's knocking on the door saying, the landlord sent me here to check your toilets, to fix your plumbing.
Yeah.
She actually has a problem with her toilet, and he's like, he just sent me today. I don't care if it's today or not, whatever. Like he's so blasé about it. And it plays so perfectly because he just doesn't seem the type who's desperate to get inside. And that's why it's so effective. All the way to the point where they're standing in front of the toilet and she just happens to make the wrong move and walk past him that gives him the impetus to grab her from behind. And yeah, it's fascinating and horrifying to watch how it plays.
So sidebar, Did you read up on where the case is now?
Yeah, I was trying to examine, because there was a recent film that came out. We'll talk about all the different iterations of this story over the years, but in 2023, last year, a film just called Boston Strangler came out with Keira Knightley, Carrie Coon, Alessandro Nivola, Chris Cooper, David Dostalmakian. Keira Knightley and Carrie Coon are both reporters. It's a story about them pursuing this and really kind of figuring it out, coining the name the Boston Strangler. Like, they're really important in the case. And they figure out a lot of the puzzle pieces before the cops do. They continue investigating this after the cops kind of wash their hands, like, hey, we caught our guy. We're done. We don't have to worry about it anymore. And they are smart enough to kind of continue figuring out, no, we think it's actually multiple killers. And the way that the story went is DeSalvo does actually confess. There was a point where Keira Knightley's character was scheduled to actually, I think, have an interview with him in the hospital, and then he ends up getting killed. And so she never actually gets to have that interview. But she does find out that he had, at an earlier time, been in an institution with two other guys, both of whom ended up doing some of the killings. And I think that's kind of what they've kind of figured out. They've never actually been able to finalize, because I can't remember if the people had died or they just never confessed or couldn't find the evidence. But it ended up being, I think, 3 different people who kind of over years ended up killing all these 13 different women. And what's interesting is that they did finally discover in 2013 that DeSalvo did, in fact, murder the very last one. There was DNA evidence linking him to that one particular case. So then that's theoretically, like, I don't know, 3 or 4 different people who potentially were involved in all of these different killings. But I mean, they actually were the ones who connected it to some similar strangulation murders that had been happening in New York at the same time, or a little bit earlier. But at the time, like, this film came out, none of that had been discovered. Like, it wasn't until, I think, the early 70s, like I want to say 73, 74, when they actually started realizing, oh, there might actually be more people that had been involved in this, but not as like a cabal or a just like random killings, people who were just getting on the bandwagon. Yeah, right. Because, oh, this is a way to kill people and I can pin it on that other person, or whatever the case may be. And interestingly, like when they were in prison or in the institution with DeSalvo, they, I think, actually talked to him about the murders and everything. And somehow, and I can't remember the exact story, but somehow they kind of, because I think that he was definitely had some struggles mentally, and they were able to kind of convince him that he needed to confess to this, which is what he ended up doing, which led to that long period of assuming that it was him. I think Tony Curtis does a really interesting job of portraying that mental fragility, right? Because in a movie where he's set up as a serial murderer, by the end, to realize that there is a shred of sympathy that the audience should have for this guy, that's pretty powerful, right? Like, he's damaged. He is a deeply damaged person. And, how is it that once he is sort of captured, I'm thinking, wow, well, he needs help. He needs some serious help. Yeah. Right? It's an interesting portrayal of a complicated character who at the time was the best understanding that we could offer, Right. To the point where they're, like in the film, they're assuming that he has a dissociative identity disorder, and like that whole idea of this version of Albert that they're talking to doesn't have any idea what's going on with the killer Albert that has been committing these. And that's what's so fascinating when we get to those later scenes with Fonda interviewing him, is how you start getting those fragmentary cuts, right? Where you're just getting flashes, like the flash editing that you get of the mental state, where we're really put inside his head as he's starting to remember those things, but can't quite piece it together, or the way that you start seeing like, yeah, I was fixing a pipe, and you see him literally fixing a pipe, but then he's like tying stuff around a pipe, and then he's tying stuff around a leg, right? And like the way you're intercutting that in his brain, it was such a perfect way to kind of give us a sense of what was actually going on in his head.
Okay, so one of the things you said is that we assumed that there was something there was something wrong with him. Was that in the real story? Do you know if he was diagnosed with DID? Is that part of his legacy?
I think that was something that they assumed in the film because they had gone through several periods of actually like hypnotizing him and trying to figure out like get him to do all of this. But I don't think that he ended up actually having dissociative identity disorder. I'm looking real quick to see, because I think that was an assumption that was
like, how could he have done this if not?
Right, exactly.
Right?
Exactly. Let me see if I can figure it out. No, I can't, I'm not finding anything as to whether he really was or not, but I feel like that was something that they kind of used in context of the film. I feel like a lot of the forensic psychology with things like that was just new at the time, and they were finding ways to like, oh, this sounds interesting, let's throw that in there,
Well, and that leads to sort of the next assessment of the film, which is like, it works, it's compelling, and I think Fonda's portrayal as he, interacts with this guy is interesting, but it does feel cinematic. Right? It feels like this is the way we're writing ourselves out of this knot that we've tied ourselves up in.
Yeah. I did find that, he was never diagnosed with, nor even suspected of, in this particular case, they say, of multiple personality disorder. But so they pretty much ruled that out in reality.
Yeah. Yeah. That's an interesting take on the film, though, like how easy those assumptions are made about the guy to write the story when they're still living in the middle of this thing that has captured public consciousness.
Yeah, it makes me wonder, like, I don't know much about the book that Gerald Frank wrote about this, but it does make me wonder, like, what was the research process that he came to with this? Because the murders were 62 to 64, and he wrote the book in, was it 66 was the book, I think? Yeah, 1966. So very soon after. And so I'm wondering, what was he basing it on? Just the news, like the press and the police reports, or did he actually go in and do any interviewing?
Yeah, that's interesting. Having not read the book, it just feels like a immediate sort of journalistic report on a story that just happened, because he would have been writing the book for the year or two prior to anyway. So he was working on the case for a while. But
exactly,
the screenplay was adapted, I guess, by Edward Anhalt.
Yeah,
who wrote Beckett and Jeremiah Johnson.
Yeah, big screenwriter. Lots of big films that he wrote, like Panic in the Streets was another fantastic one. The Young Lions. Yeah, lots of films at this particular period of time that were pretty big.
Really big. Like to have, 46 screenplay credits. That's a lot of screenplay credits.
Yeah, and a lot of them that you recognize.
Yeah,
right. Yeah,
for sure. But I think that's the dance between the book and the screenplay. I think what he did, in getting the words to screen is commendable, because it tells a really dramatic, fascinating story based on the information they had at the time. And, you can't fault it for getting it wrong.
No.
When 50 years later they get more information, that's incredible.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it is interesting. Well, yeah, I mean, there's a couple interesting angles about it. One, I think that it's interesting that, or I guess I think that it's interesting to see what Fleischer ended up doing with it, paired with his whole team, camera, editing, and everyone, to kind of put the split screen aspect of it together. And I wonder, I don't think I read that any of that was actually in the script. So I think that Fleischer kind of came to that idea, which ends up meaning essentially a lot more different pieces of story that have to be put together and figured out for each of those different elements that we're seeing at any particular point in time.
The cast was fascinating, and I look at George Kennedy. Can we just talk about George Kennedy?
Good old George Kennedy.
You know, George Kennedy has done a lot of stuff. Do you have a favorite George Kennedy?
I think I generally think of it's a terrible first choice to go to for him, but in general, the first place, it's so sad that this is where I always go to with George Kennedy when I think of him. But it's Creepshow 2, the story of the wooden Indian statue in his front of his little store that comes to life and kills all the punks that deface his place. That's where my brain goes with
Old
George
Chief
Kennedy.
Woodenhead, Andy. Old Chief Woodenhead.
Yeah.
Not great. That's not a great thing.
It's not.
I got a better one. I'm going to replace it for you.
Please.
The Naked Gun from the Files of Police Squad. Okay?
Okay.
That's where I go immediately when I see Kennedy, and then watching this movie, he's playing that character. Just you take him out, you put Leslie Nielsen in there, and you have the Naked Gun, because he was such a straight man in the Naked Gun movies.
Yeah,
I mean, absurdist, but
he does play off of Leslie Nielsen well, though.
The guy has such an extraordinary career, right? The Gunfighters, Cool Hand Luke.
Cool Hand Luke, that would be the serious one that I would say.
For sure.
I think of, yeah.
Yeah, I absolutely. And, you know, I mean, come on, the Delta Force, and like the guy, he's one of those faces that actually has a name and has been in a lot of movies through my career of movie watching that I've seen. I just love George Kennedy. Such a lovable guy.
Yeah, he was always great in whatever he ended up in. I just generally enjoyed seeing him perform.
There's a funny dance that George Kennedy gets to do, right? Because he did like Airport 79, and then they lampooned.
77. He was in both 77 and 79.
Yeah. Concorde.
And 75. He was in all of them.
He was in all of the airport movies. He did the airport movies.
Yeah.
And then they do the airplane movies. He wasn't in the airplane movies. But the serious franchise, and then the goofy franchise, and then he was in this, and then the Naked Gun, right? Like, it just feels like he's one of those actors that gets to be a part of both sides of the lampoon conversation, and I love it.
That's funny.
I love that he's so good at both.
He is. He really is. We'll get to talk about him again later this season when we talk about Straight Jacket, because he pops up in that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. The cast, I mean, Tony Curtis, I just want to go back to Tony Curtis just for a minute, because I love that Tony Curtis feels so different here. You know, he was actually, Fleischer thought of him. He was trying to come up with somebody who could carry the role, but also was enough of a name for the studio. He thought of Curtis, and initially Zanuck was like, no, he's not somebody that, because he, at this particular point in time, Tony Curtis, even though he had done serious films like the Defiant Ones and stuff, people generally thought of him as an actor who was doing kind of the romantic comedies and the just the silly comedies and stuff. And they weren't thinking of him as somebody who was a serious actor anymore. He'd kind of, as far as they were concerned, had kind of passed that point in his career and was just doing the silly movies now. And so Zanuck was like, no, that makes no sense. But Curtis really wanted it, and Fleischer really wanted him. And so Curtis did a little screen test. They were talking about this. And so Curtis put some putty on his nose to kind of bulk it up a little bit. He permed his hair, and he just kind of, I think that they basically took some photos of him, just kind of like a little more serious and rugged looking photos. And Fleischer sent them over to Zanuck, and Zanuck didn't even recognize that it was Tony Curtis, but was just like, this guy has an interesting thing going on. I like the look, the presence and everything. Let's go with him. And it was Tony Curtis. And so I think that's a really funny story. And Curtis was like, even during production, everybody essentially thought that he was not going to be able to carry the film, to the extent that, remember the scene when he's running from the guy who he pops in on the place following the lady without realizing the husband's home?
Yeah.
And the husband follows him all the way out to the street, and he gets hit by a car. Tony Curtis, there's that scene where the little VW bug comes out, hits him, he tumbles into the road. He broke his nose during that. And the reporters all were like, oh, that's it for sure. He's going to get fired now. Like they started like totally writing him off. Like, no, he's done.
Wow.
Like they really could not believe that this guy would be able to do this part. And it's so funny, like that whole story and then to see what he actually delivers here. Like, I mean, he put on some weight. He said that he wore like extra weights around his waist so that he carried himself differently. And I think that it's just a kind of a transformative performance for him, from the elements where you're seeing him committing the crimes all the way to the psychology and the interviews and everything. Like, I think this is one of those moments I think Oscar really got it wrong. And I mean, at the very least, he should have been nominated for his performance. But I mean, in a year of, some great performances, Peter O'Toole, Lion in Winter, certainly a big bombastic performance. I think Curtis absolutely should have been there and possibly won.
I do too. He's able to make himself so big and so small in this movie, where the frailty that comes across when he doesn't know what his brain is doing at the end is so clear, and he feels so small to me. But when he's standing in these apartments, he's a giant. He's larger than life, and he just all in the way he carries himself. I think it was a fantastic performance.
Yeah, and he's terrifying, and it also, like, you can't help but feel a little sad for him in the confusion that he's feeling later in trying to piece all of this stuff together. And it's just kind of sad, especially like when he's talking to his wife, who's just like, look, I'm trying to support you. I'm trying to help you. And his brain just can't get there, to the point where he eventually is like putting his hands on his wife's neck and everything. It's like, I don't know. I loved his performance here. It just is, for me, it's the best that Tony Curtis has done in a career of lots of great films. Such great films. Yeah. What a legacy. Yeah. Henry Fonda's always great. I think that he does a great job as the cop. It's funny because every time I start this movie, his voice never sounds right, and I'm convinced that for like the first few scenes that he had a really bad cold, because he just sounds, his voice doesn't sound right through a big chunk of it. That's weird. I know, it's very funny. I didn't notice. I should watch again. I always notice, like, when actors sound different. Like, there's a moment in Forrest Gump where Tom Hanks is playing ping pong, and one of the military guys comes in and says, "You're done. You can go home." And all you hear from him is a few lines like, "Yes, drill sergeant," and stuff like that. Yeah. He totally sounds sick. Like, I'm convinced that Tom Hanks had a bad cold that day. I mean, we'll never know. I doubt Tom, even if Tom were here right now, if we could ask him, I bet he wouldn't even remember. But it does seem like a weird superpower that just you would have. Right. Oh, that actor is ill. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, it's so funny. Sick like day. I may be terrible with the accents, but I could definitely tell when they have a cold. Certainly hear sinus distress. Sally Kellerman shows up, her first feature film as Diane Clooney, a kind of a mashed up amalgam of a few characters, as the one woman who he attacks, and then she kind of gets the better of him and manages to survive. How did she play for you? Well, I didn't recognize her until I looked at credits and realized that she was Hot Lips. Yeah. I didn't even recognize her in the film. She was just at an age, look, era I didn't even catch, and I thought that was awesome. I liked her a lot. I think it's the one fight, the one escape that we get, and it was satisfying. It hit all the right notes. I think she was great at being scared and taken and legitimate. It's kind of I don't know, it's a little bit of a thankless role in a movie about the serial killer, not the survivor, but it was fun to see her. Well, it's interesting the way that the survivor is portrayed here as somebody who also is so psychologically damaged from the encounter that when she is given the opportunity to come into the room and view through the glass to see him, she's like, I don't recognize him. Like, I know you're wanting me to say that that's him, but I just can't. I can't put it together. Even when George Kennedy points out, but look at the bite on his hand. Like, that's where you bit him. She's like, when I look at that, I feel scared a little bit, but I still just can't piece it together. Like, it's just fascinating, the psychology you're getting here. And I think that also is, what am I trying to say? They're definitely playing with truth as far as some of the way that played, because I don't believe that I think that she actually was able to identify him when the real woman survived.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, it works in the movie for the sake of the fictionalized tale. It plays.
Yeah, definitely does. Yeah, it's great to see her in this. I enjoy her. And, you see a lot of other little faces, like you already mentioned Murray Hamilton, but you also have William Hickey as the one guy who they think that is their guy, but it turns out not to be. Dana Elcar is one of the guys. Like, it's just fun seeing a lot of these faces as younger actors at this particular period.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fun. I mean, this is a great movie full of great faces, and I think it tells a compelling story as a deluded individual, a fictionalized version of the serial killer faces reality of his actions. I think that's the hidden story here that works.
There definitely is period elements that do make it feel a little grosser. It just reminds you how much of the time it is, like the way that they refer to the African-American woman who is, when she gets killed, the whole angle of the gay person, the kind of figuring out, is it the gay people? And there's definitely some language that they say here that's very much of the period, but largely I think they do a good job with it in general.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting element that I am curious about. When this movie came out, critics were pretty harsh on it, saying that this is something that Roger Ebert said. The Boston Strangler requires a judgment not only on the quality of the film, very good, but also on its moral and ethical implications. The events described in Frank's book have been altered considerably in the film. This is essentially a work of fiction based on the real events, and based on them in such a way to entertain us, which it does, but for the wrong reasons, I believe. This film, which was made so well, should not have been made at all.
Fascinating.
That's definitely an angle that came with a lot of the critics, that at this particular point in time, for a 1968 film, where they felt it's too graphic for us to be watching in the theaters and for us to be watching as entertainment. How does that strike you?
Well, okay. So I don't know about the graphic nature of it, right? I don't know that I can comment on that. Maybe it's because I'm desensitized just enough. This movie didn't feel terribly graphic to me. What is interesting to me, though, and this I can directly relate to, is that this movie was made in a time where people knew the story and had been following the news. And it was made over the course of a year, let's say, when news was actually happening and updating the story that was still current before the movie came out. So I can see someone like Roger Ebert, a well-read guy in the media business, knowing more about the story than the film portrays. And I can see that being very frustrating. And I run into that too. When the Steve Jobs movie came out, I was a noted antagonist. It's a good movie, and it tells bad stories about
Social Network.
The same thing. Good movie. Tells bad stories in many cases. So that I can absolutely relate to that. And I think that's one of the interesting sort of sins of the legacy of this movie, is that I watched this movie having not known much about the real story of the Boston Strangler, and had I not started reading up on it and have a conversation with you about it, I would assume this is largely true.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
But it's still a movie, and judged as a movie, it plays. I wonder, did Ebert ever update his opinion on that? Is this one of his legendary retractions?
I don't know. I haven't looked for any revised comments from him. But I do find it interesting, because I think when you have a story that is current and you have a film based on it that feels like we're watching a killer kill people who just got killed a couple of years ago, like I can see at the time people feeling like this is too real, this is too close, this is too soon. And especially when we're really watching him kind of get into these places and kill these people, like you can see that reaction. And maybe just with time, like we're so far separated from the reality of the Boston Strangler, that it's just, I mean, it just plays as a movie, and it's interesting to watch. Also, I think we have been so much more accustomed to much more gruesome killings and brutality in film over the 60 years, from this time of this film, that I think for us, it's just not even as, it's fairly tame compared to stuff we've seen. And so it just doesn't carry the same weight that it probably did for people in 1968 watching this and going, oh my God, this is what literally just happened like a couple years ago.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
I can't. Hold on a second. This is one of my favorite things, and I suddenly am blanking on what it's actually called. But it's a Michael Crichton term, Gell-Mann amnesia, right? Which was coined by Murray Gell-Mann, who's a friend of Michael Crichton's, and it tells the story of how you open up the newspaper to an article on a subject you know well. In Murray Gell-Mann's case, it's physics. In Michael Crichton's case, it's show business. You read the article and see the journalist has absolutely no understanding of either the facts or the issues. Often the article is so wrong, it actually presents the story backward, reversing cause and effect. I call these the wet streets cause rain stories. Paper's full of them. In any case, you read with exasperation or amusement the multiple errors in the story, and then you turn the page to national or international affairs and read it as if the rest of the newspaper was somehow more accurate about Palestine than the baloney you just read. You turn the page and forget what you know. That, I think, is exactly what we see in movies all the time, which is when you see something that you know well, it's easy to get upset. It's the Steve Jobs, it's the Facebook, it's those stories that that we know well and get frustrated. When I watch this one, it's Gell-Mann amnesia. I don't know anything about the story, so I make assumptions.
Well, and to that point, like when you watch the new version, the Keira Knightley version from 2023, like that film is kind of a snooze. It's not a great movie. It's interesting because it gives you a much more full picture of the actual case, taking, everything that they have learned all the way through the DNA discovery in 2013. Like you're able to actually tell a full story of everything that they have kind of figured out up to this point with the Boston Strangler. But it just didn't make for a very exciting film. And, I don't know if it's the screenplay or the director. I'm not exactly sure, but it just was, it wasn't a movie. Like this is a movie. Like this is cinema. Like this is cinematic. The way that Fleischer constructs the story and edits the story and crafts the story and chooses where to tell particular pieces of the story and build that room, like that whole final room, the interview room in the prison. Over the course of all the interviews, they're slowly removing pieces of furniture. Every time we come into the room, there's less and less furniture. So by the time we're finally seeing that last shot of him, it's just him in an empty white room. And essentially, like, he's lost in his own mind by that point. It's fascinating. Like
purely cinematic,
yeah,
right?
Exactly.
Exceptionally cinematic.
And that's what I think Fleischer is doing here. And yeah, this is, the social network of the Boston Strangler story. We're not getting the real kind of sense of what actually happened, but it is such an incredible piece of filmmaking that it's just, I don't know, for me, it's just hard to pass up.
Yeah. It's like, we'll never know what really happened in Hogwarts, just the propaganda that they shoved down our throats.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought that in. Always important to circle around to that.
We'll never know. # remember Hogwarts.
That's right. That's right. All right. Well, we'll be right back. But first, our credits.
The Next Reel is a production of True Story FM. Engineering by Andy Nelson. Music by Eli Bennicott, Ido K, Rotem Cinnamon, Oriel Novella, and Eli Catlin. Andy usually finds all the stats for the awards and numbers at the-numbers.com, boxofficemojo.com, imdb.com, and wikipedia.org. Find the show at truestory.fm, and if your podcast app allows ratings and reviews, please consider doing that for our show. This case It's a tough one. The victim, your free time. The culprit, endless scrolling, algorithmic nightmares, and ads. Yeah, you heard me. Ads. But I'm on the case. I've been following the breadcrumbs, sifting through the digital debris, and I think I've finally cracked it. It started with a whisper of a place called Letterboxd. They said it was ad-free. Could be true. My sources tell me they offer personalized stats pages, annual all-time, like a fingerprint of your movie-watching habits. They said it could track films from your watch list across any streaming service you could think of. Netflix, Hulu, HBO Max, Criterion Channel, even Tubi. Imagine knowing exactly when that obscure noir finally hits your preferred platform. Yeah, the press is hounding me. They want answers. They want the scoop. Fine. Here's what I got. Letterboxd lets you see your friends' average ratings, helps you separate the cinephiles from the, well, you know, the trash, tracks the films you own. I mean, it's like the olden days. Filters your activity feed, pins content to your profile, duplicates lists, manages tags, the works. It's a lot. But here's the real kicker. The evidence that blows this whole case wide open. For a limited time, you can get 20% off a Letterboxd subscription. 20%! The code? Write this down. Nextreel. That's NEXTREEL. Use it at sign up. Consider it your get-out-of-jail-free card. Your escape from the algorithm. Case closed. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a date with the third man. Wink. Andy, sequels and remakes. I have a lot to watch, is what it sounds like.
Well, yeah, I mean, we're not getting sequels and remakes to this particular film, but there's a lot of different iterations of the story that have since come.
It's a sequel to the truth, Andy.
It's a sequel to the truth. There you go. Actually, before this, there was a 1964 film called The Strangler, inspired by, at the time, The Unsolved Killings. Then William Goldman wrote a novel the same year, No Way to Treat a Lady, and along with its film adaptation came out the same year, both inspired by the multiple killer theories of this story. Then in 2008, there was a film, The Boston Strangler, The Untold Story, that was made. In 2010, there was a TV movie called The Front that was about a detective who reopens a case about a murder of a woman who might have actually been the very first victim of the Boston Strangler, and that plot suggests DeSalvo was not the only perpetrator of the Boston murders. And then, as I said, there was the 2023 Boston Strangler film that had been made. So a lot of different iterations of this story, and that's just like the real versions of the story. There are also a lot of different things, like the Boston Strangler as a character pops up in American Gothic, the TV show, at a particular point in time. So it's like there's a lot of different times that just the character ends up showing up in things.
Yeah, like Hogwarts. How did you do at award season? Did it get anything?
Well, I already talked about the irritation at the Oscars. And actually, it was, I can't remember, it was the movie Charlie that ended up winning. I know we talked about that when we talked about Lion in Winter. But anyway, it did get 3 nominations at the American Cinema Editors Eddie Awards. It was nominated for Best Edited Feature Film, but lost to Bullet, which, I mean, is often talked about specifically for its editing. So I guess that makes sense. But I don't know. After revisiting this, I feel like the way that they chose to craft this story with the split screens and everything, I think.
Does Bullet use split screen in anything?
I don't believe so. I think it's just the
chase is presented
chases.
Straightforward, right?
Yeah.
Because it should. They should recut that with split screen. That'd be cool.
At the Edgar Allan Poe Awards, which are writing awards, the script was nominated for Best Feature Film, but lost to Bullet. And at the Golden Globes, this is where Tony Curtis at least did get a nomination for Best Actress in a Drama, but here he lost to Peter O'Toole in The Lion in Winter.
You said Best Actress in a Drama.
Did I say Best Actress? Best Actor in a Drama.
Leave it in. Leave it in. How to do at the box office? Did it make any money?
Well, Fleischer had a nice budget of $4.1 million for this, or $37.3 million in today's dollars. The movie opened October 16th, 1968, and did quite well for itself, going on to earn $17.8 million at the box office, or $162 million in today's dollars. All told, it ended up doing really well despite some mixed reviews, landing with an adjusted profit per finished minute of just over $1 million.
Say,
pretty good.
$1 million in this economy?
Per finished minute.
Outstanding. Nice.
I'll take it.
Nice job, team.
Yeah, there you go.
I hope they're listening. Well, I'm really glad we got a chance to watch it. I can't wait to hear what you end up doing with your Letterboxd review for it.
It's just a film that I really enjoy. In fact, when I watched Boston Strangler, the 2023 one, I instantly had to put this one on to cleanse my palate and watch something a little more cinematic and interesting. So, great film, definitely worth checking out. So, yeah, high on my list.
Perfect.
Yep.
Perfect.
We'll be right back for our ratings, but first, here's the trailer for next week's movie, Gordon Fleming's The Split.
There's 80,000 seats in the place.
And that's a lot of money.
Jim Brown is McLean, a dark horse with a bright idea.
500,000 split 6 ways.
I don't like who I'm working with.
Either we're all locked in or none of us are.
In McLean's violent underworld, they judge a man by the color of the money he steals.
Don't you know it's just a game, love? So make believe that this is real love.
You have the whole world to mess up. Why me?
You're on the spot, boy.
Oh, there were no names, but a style that was unmistakable.
They were having the time of their lives until it came time for the split.
What are you guys trying to pull? Some kind of 50-50 split here? Convince me you didn't set it up.
I want my money, McLean.
You busted in the wrong place this time, buddy.
He'll kill you.
I won McLean.
The human mind is a complex and often disturbing labyrinth. As a student of criminal psychology, I've spent countless hours delving into the darkest recesses of the psyche, trying to understand what drives a person to commit the most heinous of acts. But there's one case that has always haunted me, one that I've never been able to fully unravel: the mystery of why some people have not yet joined the Next Reel's membership program. It's a puzzling case, one that defies all logical explanation. The evidence is clear, the facts irrefutable. The Next Reel offers an unparalleled cinematic experience, a deep dive into the world of film that is both intellectually stimulating and emotionally gripping. Their team of expert analysts dissects each movie with the precision of a surgeon, laying bare the hidden themes, the subtle nuances, the psychological underpinnings that make great cinema so powerful. It's a masterclass in film appreciation, one that no true cinephile should miss. And yet, despite all of this, there are still those who hesitate, who resist the pull of this incredible opportunity. It's a mystery that keeps me up at night, poring over the clues, trying to understand the twisted workings of the criminal mind. But you, my friend, you have a chance to break free from this cycle of cinematic deprivation. By joining the Next Reel's membership program, you can gain access to a wealth of exclusive content, ad-free episodes, and extended editions that will take your film knowledge to the next level. It's a simple choice, really. For just $5 a month or $55 a year, you can unlock the secrets of cinema, explore the depths of the human psyche, and join a community of like-minded individuals who share your passion for film. The clues are all there. The evidence is overwhelming. The only question that remains is this: will you join us in this psychological investigation, or will you remain a cinematic bystander, forever haunted by the mysteries of the silver screen? The choice is yours. But if you're ready to take the plunge, if you're ready to explore the darkest corners of the cinematic mind, then head over to truestory.fm/join and join the Next Reels membership program today. Because in the end, the only way to truly understand the criminal mind is to immerse yourself in it, to let it consume you, to become one with the darkness. And that, my friend, is exactly what the Next Reel offers. So don't wait. Don't let this opportunity slip through your fingers. Join us, and together we'll unravel the mysteries of cinema, one twisted psyche at a time. truestory.fm/join. The key to unlocking the secrets of the cinematic mind. Join us before it's too late.
Letterboxd, Andy. Letterboxd, letterboxd.com/the next reel. That's where you can find our HQ page. And I'm dying to know how many stars and hearts this movie gets for you.
I have long had it at 4.5 stars and a heart on my Letterboxd, and I'm not sure why it's 4.5 and not just 5. Like, I don't know where I thought the half star was lost. It could be in some of the way that there are some dated elements with it, But honestly, I think on this watch, I think it's just up to a 5 stars and a heart for me.
There's no question. It's a 5-star heart movie.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
What is that average to, Andy?
That averages actually to 5 stars and a heart, believe it or not, which you can find over on our account on Letterboxd at The Next Reel. You can find me there at Soda Creek Film, and you can find Pete there at Pete Wright. So what did you think about The Boston Strangler? We would love to hear your thoughts. Hop into the Show Talk channel over in our Discord community, where we will be talking about the movie this week.
When the movie ends,
our conversation begins.
Letterboxd giveth, Andy.
As Letterboxd always doeth.
All right. What do you got? It was a hard choice.
It was a hard choice, yeah. A lot of long reviews, just serious reviews.
Long.
No one's having fun in their reviews of this film.
I know.
Or they just don't hate, or they hate it. That's the other problem. I went with I Watch, who has no stars or hearts. It's just a review. Here we go.
Okay.
Fascinating fictoid flick. What I liked: the split screens, controlled, intelligent, focused. The ending, whiteout, silence, powerful, effective. Tony Curtis, finally acting. He's very good in this. My only nitpick is his hands. Soft with manicured nails. No furniture repairman has hands like this. What I didn't like so much: Henry Fonda. Eternally Henry Fonda. Such a juxtaposition with George Kennedy, like the old Hollywood versus the new. George, while always being George is a natural, I believe in him. Henry? Nah. There's a shot of the two of them walking away. Backs turned to the camera. George is walking. Henry is Henrying. Where's Carl Malden when you need him?
That's good. Henry's Henrying.
Yeah, he's Henrying.
Wow. Well, I've got one from Adam that is a 3-star and a heart. 3-star and a heart. Adam says, and I'm going to do my best to do it justice. Boring. I couldn't care. Oh, wow. You're so cool for using split screens in your movie. Rolling eyes emoji. That's it.
I like that it's boring.
It is. It's boring. I can't tell if Adam liked it or not at 3 stars and a heart. He put it at, it equates to a 6-star in IMDb. It's watchable. Yeah. And yet it's boring.
He's been boringed.
He's been boringed.
Maybe it boringed into his brain.
Oh, like he can't let it go now.
Yeah. I'm going to go with that.
Me too. Thanks, Letterboxd.
We have discussed so many fantastic movies on The Next Reel over the years. And Pete, I've got to say, I've been itching to revisit The Bank Job lately. Talk about a great heist film that we've talked about.
Totally. And Under the Cherry Moon, too, right? But hold up. Before you hit that rental button, check out The Next Reel's new watch page. It's your one-stop shop for Apple and Amazon links to all the movies featured in our current season. We're even filling in the gaps from past seasons along the way.
Wow, how convenient. So we can easily watch the movies that we rave about on the show using those links?
Absolutely. Plus, by using those links to rent or purchase movies, Apple and Amazon show us a little bit of love, which allows you to support the show with minimal effort.
Talk about a win-win.
That's right. Head over to thenextreel.com/watch to pick out your next movie and start watching today.